All right, well, let's go to another issue. There was a report last week from the Australian Energy Regulator that clearly showed that the closure of Liddell Power Station has been responsible for pushing up power prices by some 30%. I mean, Liz, this is a direct correlation and none of the politicians seem to be talking about it. We're having record high electricity bills this winter, and despite being promised we wouldn't, and we'll get to that in a second, Paul, but, you know, the transition to renewable energy needs to happen at a way that people can afford it during a cost of living crisis.
Absolutely. And this is completely inexcusable. I'm surprised people haven't already taken to the streets because the government knows the pain that it's going to inflict. They do it anyway. Now, forget about Liddell. It's all about Eraring. Like, that, responsible for New South Wales, 20% of our entire energy comes from that one plant, and all they can do is talk about how quickly they can close it, and we're on target to close it, and even if we aren't, we're going to do it. People are already suffering to pay their power bills. It's only going to get worse, and the government keeps on saying ridiculous things like, oh, but it's going to get cheaper and renewables are going to be cheaper, and so we're just going to suffer until we can build it up enough. We haven't seen any return on investment for the millions that has already been sown into the subsidies, into the building of all this. Now we've got things like farmers forming a coalition to make sure that their land isn't co-opted by government for these new, high voltage renewable transmission lines. It's utterly ridiculous. We don't even need a new grid. We only need it because the one that we have isn't fit for purpose for renewables, which we don't need if we just stuck with perfectly good baseload power that is cheap and reliable.
I think that anyone who's talked about this for 10 years like we all have, and anyone who's been watching it and living it like you have, you know that the logic is to go from one complete power grid to another one's going to cost a lot of money.
Yes.
Pretty obvious that you, the customer, is going to have to pay it, or you, through the government's going to have to pay it. What particularly annoys me is that the cost of transition has never been admitted by the people who demand the transition, and the people who have to pay it are just told to shut up. Instead, they turn around and pretend, oh, there'll be a reduction of 275. There'll be 500,000 jobs that'll fall from the sky as we move towards renewable energy. Because what did they learn? They learnt when Shorten didn't have an answer to what's the cost of transition, they lose an election. When they put lipstick on a pig and BS that everyone's going to save money and get new jobs, well, guess what ends up happening? They get a different result. The problem is, once they're in there, they just lock the door behind them, and then their entire political philosophy, like any government that's in power, is to say, please re-elect us because we're better than the other guys.
I mean, you keep playing the clips on your show, Paul, of how everyone promised that power would be $275 cheaper for families under Labor. And, you also, speaking of exclusives, you also pointed out that the energy bill relief was coming off for families. Now suddenly all the other media are reporting on that now. But it's hurting people. And as Sam Crosby, who was on before, said, a lot of people were on fixed loans, which come off this year. Very tough for a lot of Australians.
But again, sorry, Liz, is that you've got this scenario where how many people are hurting on how many different fronts? We had a chance to keep $1,500 of our own money. This government made a decision to save $3 billion to get us, from $17 to $20 billion in the surplus that they have. And now people are starting to work out that $1,500 that 35% of Australians rely upon their tax return to help pay major bills.
Absolutely.
This is all well and good if you're a multi-$100,000 minister, but when you're a normal person trying to juggle things, these decisions matter.
Yeah, absolutely. And like I said before, they just don't seem to care. They make these empty promises. They expect everyone to believe it. And sadly, it seems to go well for them half the time. People need to start holding them to account and just being like, no, you guys are actually lying.
Yeah, well, people forget about the promises that were made until they're replayed over and over again on our programs.